Hi, wrestling fans. This is Bob Cola to tell you about the return of the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance, to Winston-Salem on June 3rd and 4th. It's the NWA Crockett Cup, featuring 24 of the top teams from around the world, and a fan fest featuring legends and stars from the past. It's the Crockett Cup, Winston-Salem Fairgrounds Annex Building, June 3rd and 4th. Don't miss it.
Hi, Chaz Kangas here for Speak Minneapolis. Like you, I'm very excited for this weekend's Crockett Cup in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, airing on Fight TV. And in celebration of that, joining me right now, my special guest, Psycho Boy Fodder. Psycho Boy, how you doing today?
Good, man. How about yourself? Thank you for having me.
Spectacular. Thanks for joining us. So we're excited. This weekend's the big Crockett Cup tournament, and it is in North Carolina, which, from what I can tell, tracking down, is your place of birth and home state. And is that correct?
Yeah, that is. Yeah, I'm actually from Fayetteville, North Carolina. I got it right here on the throat. So.
Oh, nice. Those perfect, like the area code, that unmistakable 3 numbers. So.
Yeah, cool. I don't know. My mother might not agree with you. She might tell you it was a bad idea.
Oh, well, now you'll never forget it. So you can always look down and find it. There's ways to spin that to show that it helps the moms out.
True indeed.
Yeah. Cool. So North Carolina, especially over the past decade, has become such a hotbed for new wrestling talent. And it's all just essentially the latest chapter of North Carolina for decades and decades being such an important place for wrestling. So what was the path like for you being born, in such close proximity to where so much great wrestling has emerged from, into starting and finally stepping into the squared circle?
Well, I mean, I always grew up a super fan of professional wrestling. So like when I was younger, in Raleigh, North Carolina, they used to run a lot of indie shows at a place called King's Bar. It was a Southern Championship Wrestling, SCW. And there were tons of guys that came out of there, like C.W. Anderson, Shannon Moore, the Hardy Boys, Shane Helms. So when I was actually in middle school, my art teacher, who actually ended up wrestling for TNA, he actually got me into wrestling school when I was 16. They found out about maybe 3 or 4 sessions into it that I wasn't 18 like he had told them. And they told me I couldn't come back. So like my journey was like a little bit different. Like I got off into doing other things, and I got like heavily involved in like bodybuilding and doing bodybuilding competitions. And then a few years ago, when I was 33 at the time, I just saw an advertisement and I was like, you know what? Like, if I'm ever going to do it or try to do it, I might as well try right now. And I ended up going to wrestling school. And from there, it just kind of like took off really fast for me.
And it took off during a pretty interesting time, too, because I think it'd be fair to say that you started making your splash in the indies in 2021, which was essentially, mid-lockdown pandemic time, when there's so many restrictions on places around the country and around the world, for that matter, allowing live wrestling to even take place. Perhaps maybe even the most difficult time to make a name in the world of wrestling. So that in mind, what was it like having your first major matches in front of people during a time of such restrictions? And have you noticed much of a difference between performing in front of those crowds, or because of the restrictions, maybe in some places not quite crowds as we know them, that you've carried on into your performance now?
So like when I first started training was like late September 2019. Mm-hmm. And then the COVID kind of hit. Was it maybe February or March, like 2020? And when that happened, there was a small shutdown, but like, all over the country, like, every governor was like operating different, and they were all shutting things down at different times. So I was still able to train for quite a while. And then when I got involved with EC3 with doing the Control Your Narrative stuff, a lot of the first matches that I did were in front of no crowds, because they were being filmed. Like when we were doing the Control Your Narrative stuff, they were filming the matches. I mean, you would go in and do the match like it was an actual match in front of a crowd, but they would just film it like cinematically, like with the cameraman in the ring. So when you're wrestling like that in front of no crowds, you can kind of just work at whatever pace you want to work at, because there's nobody to really play to. But when you start getting into working in front of crowds, and there's a whole nother dynamic that comes into it, with just listening to the crowd and seeing what they're giving you and what they're reacting to. So when I first started doing matches, I mean, they were just kind of starting to let the fans come back. So it was a little bit of a process, because we ended up doing that first cinematic narrative thing that ended up on Impact. That was like mid 2020. And then I would say late 2020 is when I first started kind of having matches in front of crowds, because they started opening things up a little bit later in 2020. And then in 2021, we did the narrative 2, when Adam Scherr, or Braun Strowman, as a lot of people would know him, he had got released from WWE, and we did the big Free the Narrative 2 production. And then after that, I was already kind of like doing a lot of indies, because most everything was kind of open back up at that time. And we did the run in like at Ring of Honor, and then like after that I ended up doing like a bunch of stuff like with AEW. So it just kind of just spiraled out really fast.
Cool. So was there any point when the crowd started going to become larger and larger? Was that jarring at all, because it was so different from what you were doing, or did you find it was pretty easy to ride that wave and enjoy it more?
Oh yeah, I think working in front of crowds is just all about your level of how comfortable you are. If you're somebody that gets like bad anxiety, when you're working smaller shows in front of 100, 200 people, it's easier to kind of like jack with the fans, and you're having like kind of like a more like intimate experience. But when you're working in front of 1,500, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000, you really can't see past like the third row. So that, I would say, it may sound weird, but like working in front of like the big crowds is a little less nerve wracking, because you really can't see them, past a couple of rows out.
I can see that. Yeah, kind of like there's between like looking at trees and looking at forests almost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sweet. So, NWA, of course, like with it being this weekend and something as long tenured as the Crockett Cup, do you recall even going back to like your days, like as a fan, what your first exposure to the NWA was?
Man, probably anything Ric Flair. Anything Ricky Morton. Ricky Morton got me my job at NWA, which is kind of a crazy thing. I grew up watching him, and then I ended up wrestling him on an indie, and we just kind of became really good friends. And he recommended me to go to the NWA. And I always thought like the NWA was probably the best place for me to work, because Billy allows you a lot of creative freedom to kind of do what you want and get your character over. Obviously he has input and say in what's going on, but he's very involved in like wanting you to do what's best for your character, and make it all make sense. So the NWA has been around forever. The Crockett Cup is the most legendary tag team tournament in the history of professional wrestling. And for me, it's even just kind of mind blowing being in it or involved with it.
Yeah, you mentioned Billy, or for those watching who may not be familiar, Billy Corgan, William Corgan, Smashing Pumpkins lead singer, currently the promoter and owner of the NWA, and coming to you from Minneapolis. We're familiar with his wrestling work going back to the Resistance Pro days in the early 2010s, and at that point when there weren't as many indies, the road trips going out to there, and you mentioned his allowing people to really have their personalities like fully shown has been something that I think's been a fixture of his endeavors in wrestling, and definitely carrying on through to today's NWA. Compared to other promoters you've worked with, I was hoping you could say a little bit more about that, like the difference in working with Billy Corgan versus working with the others.
I think just the NWA it's very like, it's a very easy place to work, man. Like everybody in the locker room is super cool. Everybody's chill. Like there's no drama. I mean, it's a fun place to be. And I think uh Billy Corgan is, I mean, everything comes from the top down. So I think like his approach to like wrestling and how wrestling should be done and how you can do it creatively, like in your own way, and still work it in like with the storylines that they have or the things that they're trying to do with you. It's just very easy, man. It's probably like the easiest place I've ever worked, man, because like everything that we do there is so fun.
Nice. So, you mentioned prior to wrestling, you had your time in the focusing with your physique, and you're a former physique champion as well.
Sure.
Yep. And now you're also known for, on top of still having the physique, a use of weaponry, the psycho stick.
Yeah, yeah.
So, having such knowledge that it requires to be a physique champion, does that change in your own approach and the presentation of your use of weapons on other physiques?
Um, I mean, I don't know if it changes like my use of the weapons on a physique, but I think for sure you need to be able to have a good physique to tolerate the beatings from the psycho stick for sure.
Do you have any particular trainings or warm-ups you do when you know you're going to be entering a match where weapons are going to be, let's say, more used than normal?
I mean, as long as I have the psycho girl with me, then I'm ready to go at any given time. I'm ready to rock and roll.
Mhm. Gotcha. And then the other part of like your psycho teaming, this weekend you'll be part of the Flippin' Psychos in this tournament. So how, and being prior to that, you were mostly known for a lot of your singles work, even like with your name Fodder, stemming from if I recall correctly, how you were credited in the initial Control Your Narrative video
Yeah.
pack, right?
Mm.
So how different is preparing for something like a tag team match, or a tag team tournament, as it were, as opposed to working solo?
Man, I love working solo because I always believe that like I can live and die on my own, right? So like if I'm in a singles match and the match is not good, then it's either on me or it's on my opponent. And we can figure out ways to kind of to clean that up if that's the case. But a tag team is like there's a lot of guys involved, and there's a lot more rules and a lot more thinking that goes into the matches and things like that. So I mean, I'm pumped to have Flip as a partner in this tournament. Um, Flip is a guy who is incredibly talented. I mean, the things that he can do in the ring. I mean, as far as just acrobatics, like I don't know if I could do half the things that he does. But I think like with his skill set, with what he's able to do, and then my skill set, which is kind of the complete opposite. When we come together, I think you're going to see like a lot of cool double team moves and just things that people haven't seen yet in the Crockett Cup, I would say.
Nice. So, and again, like with the Crockett Cup being in Winston-Salem, and bringing it all back around to North Carolina, do you find there's much of a difference performing in front of North Carolina crowds versus other crowds that the wrestling journey has taken you in the past 2 years?
I mean, I think depending on where you go, is the type of wrestling that people like to see. Down south is the very like traditional pro wrestling, good guy, bad guy. Crowd cheers the good guy, they boo the bad guy. That's the professional wrestling that I grew up on. So I love that because I love to interact with the crowd. Whereas, like I think if you get more like up north, there's a lot more emphasis on like the sport side of like professional wrestling, where it's like a lot of spots, man, a lot of like super quick reversals and things like that. So you kind of got to know like what kind of crowd you're working in front of, and then try to give the crowd what they like. So like if I was working like in New Jersey, for instance. I would probably, because I'm more of a character-based wrestler, I would still probably get all my character stuff in. But if I was working with somebody that does like that particular style of wrestling that's in that area, obviously like we want to work some of that stuff in too, man, so that the fans can, be happy with the match because, that's the type of wrestling that they like.
Gotcha. Cool. So, do you have a match that you're particularly proud of that you wish was more well known? And this answer could be beyond even like your NWA work, just in your career thus far.
Oh man, dude. I mean, like on my YouTube channel, I have so many matches like on my YouTube channel, man, because I try to get my cameraman to go everywhere with me. When I'm very particular because I'm a Virgo and I want things to look a certain way and I want them to be presented in a certain way. So I'm very particular on professionalism and how your product comes across because, Psycho Boy Fodder or Psycho Love, the tag team, or Flippin' Psychos, the tag team. You want it all when people see it for the very first time. You want those people to see it and go like, wow, like this looks professional. This stuff is good. So I mean, as far as like matches, I mean like cool matches that you could really check out like on my YouTube channel, like me and EC3 versus Billy Gunn and QT Marshall at District Wrestling. Me versus QT Marshall at District Wrestling in a singles match. Me versus Gangrel. That was a good match that happened at Dorton Arena in Raleigh, North Carolina. Anything that I've done like with Tal Hero at Great Lakes Championship Wrestling in Wisconsin. I mean, there's so many matches. I wrestled Zach Gowen in his retirement match, which was working like a guy like him. It's very different, because he's only got one leg. So you kind of got to work around like what he can do. And he kind of showed me like how to be like creative and like think out of the box. And, he just kind of taught me like a lot of things about, ways to work around things and still make the match very good. And he's definitely like a true pro, man. I'm not sure if like Ace Austin from Impact, like me and him had a great match. Me and Moose was a really good match. Me and Weston Blake. I mean, there's tons of the stuff on YouTube and you can watch it all for free.
That fits my budget perfectly.
Yeah, perfect, right?
Yep. Yeah. Cool. Well, can't thank you enough for this, Psycho Boy Fodder. Wishing you and the Flippin' Psychos best of luck this weekend at the Crockett Cup presented by NWA, June 3rd and 4th in Winston-Salem and available on Fight TV. Thank you once again so much. And hope to see you in Minnesota, and the wrestling journey takes you up here soon too.
Definitely, man. Thank you guys for having me.
Hi, wrestling fans. This is Bob Cola to tell you about the return of the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance, to Winston-Salem on June 3rd and 4th. It's the NWA Crockett Cup, featuring 24 of the top teams from around the world, and a fan fest featuring legends and stars from the past. It's the Crockett Cup, Winston-Salem Fairgrounds Annex Building, June 3rd